April 27th, 1992, Kirby was first introduced into the world in Kirby's Dream Land, which was released on the Game Boy in Japan, with the North American release coming on August 1st of 1992, and Europe getting the game a couple days later. Since then, Kirby has become one of Nintendo's most popular and well-known mascots in gaming, with over 30 games being made, countless amounts of merchandise, and even getting an animated TV series called Kirby Right Back At Ya. All of Kirby's success has allowed the lovable pink puffball to be the 9th best-selling Nintendo franchise with just over 42 million sales in video games alone. Now, Kirby can be found on every main Nintendo console and handheld device in some form, whether it be a main series game, a spin-off, or a remaster. What I want to do is look at all of Kirby's main series releases since 1992 and look at how the game has evolved. We can look at graphics of the game, mechanics of the game, difficulty, how long it took, really anything that comes to mind, and I want to see the evolution over almost 30 years of gaming in a small series of 2 videos total. Now, what is a main series Kirby game? Well, I didn't really know what to consider as the main series and what is a spin-off, so I went to the internet. With a lot of research, I learned that Kirby has a lot of spin-offs, ranging from pretty simple stuff from pinball all the way to beautifully made games like Kirby's Epic Yarn. I'm not saying pinball isn't beautiful, but just look at it. It's pinball. We will talk a little bit about the spin-off games, but after the spin-off games, I'd like to eliminate the remakes and collections off this list of games, as I'd much rather play the original. There's only 5 games in this variety, and lucky for me, 2 of them are remakes of spin-offs. The first remake was Kirby Superstar Stacker, which was a remake of Kirby Star Stacker. This remake was released only in Japan on the Super Famicom, though. Next remake was Kirby's Nightmare in Dreamland, which was a remake of Kirby's Adventure on the NES. As much as I love this remake, I will be looking at the original. Next is a lot of people's favorite, with Kirby Superstar Ultra being a remake to Kirby Superstar. Same thing as Nightmare in Dreamland. I love it, but the original is the way to go. The next game on this list isn't a remake, but just a re-release of 6 Kirby games, which was Kirby's Dream Collection, which was made to celebrate Kirby's 20th anniversary. On a side note though, the Dream Collection is a pretty sweet deal. It's got some new challenges, it's got 6 classic Kirby games, numerous amounts of facts and artwork, 3 episodes of the animated series, hell, they even have a live recording of music being played. All of that for only $40 when it was released. I paid $80. The last remake was Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn, which is a remake of, well, you can guess it. No, it's not Kirby, yeah, right? It's Kirby's Epic Yarn, of course. Now, if the remakes and spin-offs out of the way, that leaves 12 games total. These 12 games. I need to get my hand on all of these games and play them in order of release. Lucky for me, the Dream Collection has 6 of them. And then I can buy 3 of them off the Wii U eShop, and I can buy Star Allies at any local retailer. The last 2 games are 3DS games, which are not easy to record due to no 3DS games on any console eShops. And if you want to record 3DS, you need a capture card, which I do have, but it's wireless and it does not really work too well. I'll try to set something up, but we'll come back to these games when the time comes. For now, let's get into Kirby's Dream Land. Like other big franchises, Kirby's debut game is still the best-selling in the series with over 5 million sales to this day. The plot to this game is rather simple. King Dedede, who most consider to be the main antagonist in the series, steals all the food in Dreamland along with all the sparkling stars. It's your job as Kirby to stop Dedede and save Dreamland. Now let's talk about the gameplay and mechanics. When a lot of people think of Kirby, they think of his ability to suck enemies up and gain whatever ability they have. But that wasn't introduced until the next main series game, Kirby's Adventure. Despite not having the most well-known ability introduced yet, Dreamland still finds ways to make Kirby stick out with its cute design, ability to float, and the combat. There are a couple added items like spicy curry and mint leaves throughout the game, but that just adds small effects like spit and fireballs for a short period of time. By the way, did you know Kirby's design was originally a placeholder when in early development? Which is why it's just a simple ball-like appearance, but creator Masahiro Sakurai liked the placeholder design so much he just made it the final design. Also, don't forget about Masahiro, we're going to talk about him later. But back to the game. Gameplay, it's really short, as I was able to beat it in 37 minutes on my playthrough, but I will say it was a very memorable time. The game only has 5 levels total, and each level ends with a boss fight, rewarding you with a sparkling star when you win. Like most games, the 5 bosses will make other appearances in games later on. Wispy Woods, Lololo and Lalala, Kabula, Krako, and King Dedede are all the bosses in this game. The general idea of all the bosses are the same, where they leave projectiles for you to suck up, whether it be an apple, a Waddle Dee, or a star, and just spit it at them to do damage. Except Kabula, you eat a special mint leaf that allows you to spit unlimited air puffs at the boss while you dodge cannonballs. And before we move on, can I just say Kirby saying Fololo and Falala in the anime? It's adorable.
And we're their friends, Fololo and Falala. Fololo, Falala.
I love Kirby. The last level of the game makes you rematch all the 4 previous bosses before you fight Dedede, but if you die, you don't need to restart from the beginning and refight all the bosses again. If you beat a boss, they'll stay beaten. And once Dedede is beaten, all the food is returned to Dreamland and the credits roll. For extra content outside the main game after the credits roll, it tells you that extra game is unlocked by hitting A, select, and up on the D-pad when you're on the title screen. All it offers is a harder playthrough of the game for more experienced gamers. New enemies, bosses have a new moveset, and I avoided it. And that's Kirby's Dream Land for you, the first installment in a series that showed a lot of potential with better technology and given another chance. And since Dreamland sold so well, it was definitely going to be getting more games. And the next game introduced in the series will be a much bigger one. And here we are, 1 year later, Kirby makes their way to the home console for the first time with Kirby's Adventure, which was released in 1993 on the NES. Adventure had some big sale numbers to live up to, as Dreamland ended up being one of the best-selling Game Boy games on the market. Well, Kirby's Adventure only sold 1.75 million copies and was outsold by Kirby's Pinball, which was released later in the year. But the Game Boy had almost doubled the amount of copies sold compared to the NES, so there was more of a market. Still, almost 2 million sales is nothing to feel bad about. Hell, even I have a copy of the game and it's older than me. Adventure was also the first game remade in the future for Kirby outside of Japan, with Nightmare and Dreamland releasing in 2002. If we add those sales from Nightmare and Dreamland, the game almost sold 4 million copies. But enough about statistics, let's get into the story and gameplay. Kirby wakes up from an after-lunch nap feeling terrible and goes to the Dream Spring, which is a magical well, which is a reservoir for all the dreams in Dreamland. Legends say it was created by the Star Rod, which in this game is missing when Kirby arrives at the spring. But he does see King Dedede bathing in the spring and causing mischief once again. Dedede says he broke up the Star Rod into 7 pieces and gave each of his friends a piece. Each piece represents a chapter, I'd say, in the game, with each chapter having its own set of levels. Overall, there are about 42 levels, which is a lot for an NES game. Besides the levels being introduced, Adventure added so many new things to the series that you can't imagine a Kirby game without. Smaller stuff like the addition of Goal Game, where at the end of each stage you tap A at a certain time to try to gain bonuses. 4 sub-games are also added into the story: Crane Fever, Quick Draw, and Egg Catcher. They all give you bonuses for 1-ups based on how you do. In Crane Fever, you control a crane arm and get 2 chances to snag a Kirby plush. Small one's worth 1-up, and the big one's worth 2. Quick Draw, you have a standoff with enemies, and when the screen says fire, you tap A as fast as you can. There's only 5 enemies you need to beat, and the more you beat, the higher the bonus. And Egg Catcher has King Dedede throwing bombs and eggs at you, and your job is to catch eggs without catching any bombs. The more eggs caught equals more points. The last subgame is focused around another more prevalent addition to the game, which is mid-bosses. And the reason they're prevalent in this game is because of what mid-bosses give you. But firstly, the last game mode is called Arena, and all you do is fight a mid-boss, which depending on the boss gives you an ability. And that brings up the biggest change in the game and the most well-known feature in the Kirby franchise, which is the copy ability. The way the copy ability works is that certain enemies have special abilities. For example, an enemy has a beam and Kirby sucks them up and swallows them. Kirby gains that ability until we take any damage. But if we take damage, the ability turns into a star and we can suck it back up. Now, if you swallow 2 enemies that both have abilities at the same time, it turns into a roulette of all the abilities and you get a random one. The game introduced 25 abilities total. They all have their own use. Some were more common than others, therefore some were more strong than others. We also get to see some cute little artwork of Kirby with the abilities at the bottom, but that's just a nice little bonus. And one last big change that I cannot forget about this game also has color now. Woo! To be fair, this system did advertise astounding game graphics, vivid colors and sound, and high-powered accessories. It's a great time to be a gamer. Okay, Dylan, you don't want to get too excited here. Now on to the actual gameplay and the campaign. All the levels are still just platformers, as that's what the game is, a platformer. The combat's relatively the same and will stay the same throughout the franchise, besides for some small additions here and there. The only big difference from the first game is obviously the copy ability, which adds much more variety to the fighting. With 7 chapters total compared to the 4 levels this time around, we will have some new bosses in the game. But don't worry, a few familiar faces make a reappearance. Wispy Woods, Kracko, and King Dedede all make a return, and they're looking fantastic. The new bosses were Paint Roller, Mr. Shine and Mr. Bright, Heavy Mole, and the wildly popular character Meta Knight. And here's another fun little fact: we didn't know Meta Knight's true name until the release of Kirby's Avalanche in 1995. But like Dreamland, the bosses aren't at all too complicated to beat. I felt they did have more of a challenge than last time because of the addition of abilities, which make the bosses take more damage freely. One thing I've always loved about Kirby that I feel like isn't talked about a lot is the design of bosses. They never cease to amaze me. The ending of this game is actually a pretty fun one. Once you beat Dedede, it's actually revealed he broke the Star Rod to try and stop the actual final boss named Nightmare, who who's trying to spread nightmares across Dreamland. And once you beat Dedede, the Star Rod is restored and you have to fight Nightmare. This final boss fight has 2 phases, and with this boss you can just spam the Star Rod, as Nightmare doesn't give you any projectiles so they can be shot back. Once Nightmare is defeated, the Star Rod gets returned to the fountain and everything returns to normal. And a fun little thing about the Nightmare fight is that for the first time in the series, you have a set time limit to beat the level. It doesn't have a countdown clock or anything, but the first phase of the battle, you can run out of time and die. And that's basically the whole main game. With the main game beaten, we unlock a new mode called Versus Boss, where we can face every boss in a row, and also unlock the ability to play all the sub games whenever we want. I only got 78% complete, but if you 100% this game, you unlock extra game just like in Dreamland. This time Kirby only has 3 hit points and progress is not saved. If you end up beating the game, you're rewarded with the sound test. Now in the remake Nightmare in Dreamland, the extra mode, all the progress is saved if you quit, and if you beat extra mode, you get a fun new game mode called Meta Nightmare, where you play through the game as Meta Knight with only 3 hit points. I thought that was a really fun addition to the remake. Kirby's Adventure plus Nightmare in Dreamland. It's one of my favorite games as a whole, and being able to play through Adventure really brought up some good memories with Nightmare in Dreamland. And for a game made in 1993, it held up well. I enjoyed the graphics, gameplay, and fight, and just overall everything made me love it. It took me just under 4 hours to beat the game as a whole and would play through it again. But enough about nostalgia, let's jump into the next main series game which I never played before this, which was Kirby's Dream Land 2, which was introduced on March 21st in 1995, with the main 3 regions all having different release dates as usual. It was released on the Game Boy, and like the original on the Game Boy, Dreamland 2 sold well with over 2.25 million copies. And just like Kirby's Adventure and Kirby's Dreamland, it sold over 1 million copies in Japan alone. With the game releasing in 1995, though, it left plenty of time for some spin-offs to release, and in that 2-year window, we got 3 Kirby spin-offs with Kirby Pinball, Kirby Dream Course, and then Kirby's Avalanche. The 3 spin-offs were pretty, well, basic. Kirby Pinball was the first release of the 3 in late 1993 and sold over 2 million copies. All you did in this game was go through 3 pinball tables, which each have 3 floors and a boss at the end. And once all 3 bosses are defeated, you fight King Dedede. And honestly, I played it, and it was actually a lot of fun. But the next spin-off was Kirby's Dream Course, which was released in 1994 for Japan, early 1995 for America, and middle of 1995 for the rest of the world. It was really just golf with Kirby as the ball. It did have 10 copy abilities in the game to make it stand out, and there was enemies on the course. A fun little Kirby feel for those big fans of the franchise, wanting Kirby on the SNES. It only sold a little above 500,000 copies though. And I also played this one, and it was a lot of fun. God dang it, Kirby, why are you so addicted and perfect? Just look at Kirby. Look at him. They're perfect. Okay, enough about my love for Kirby. The last spin-off was Kirby's Avalanche, and I'll be honest, I know nothing about the gameplay. This game was released first in the PAL regions on February 1st of 1995, and then April 25th in North America. Oh yeah, and Spain had it released in September of 1996 for some reason. This was the only Kirby game not released in Japan, as Avalance was a direct modification of the game Super Puyo Puyo, which was a series unfamiliar with the West until the early 2000s. Nintendo must have thought, hey, let's just slap the Kirby franchise on it, that'll do. But all these spin-offs you can still get access to today with virtual consoles, but good luck finding Avalanche, as after the Wii Virtual Console back in 2007, it has not been introduced again. As for Dream Course and Pinball Land, they're on the latest and greatest, with Pinball being on the 3DS Virtual Store, and Dream Course being available in the SNES Classic Edition for people with Switch Online, alongside the Wii U and 3DS stores. Now back to Dreamland 2. The game adds some fun new mechanics from the first Dreamland. The biggest change was the addition of 3 animal friends that help along Kirby's adventure to save Dreamland. We have Rick the hamster, best suited for land, Koo, an owl best suited for flying in the air, and then Kind the fish, who makes it easier to swim in the ocean. All the new animal friends also can merge abilities with Kirby to make the ability being used even stronger. But now one of the downsides was the amount of abilities in the game. It doesn't affect the gameplay too much to me, it's just less variety than the previous title. We went from a solid 25 abilities to 8. And one of them is only available with the true ending of the game. So really only 7 abilities throughout most of the game. Oh, wait, what's that? What's a true ending? Well, a true ending in the game is basically when the primary plot ends and you beat the main goal of the game. Sometimes it's not clear that there's a true ending, but the Kirby series has a few games with multiple endings, with Dreamland 2 being the first. Now, before I can explain the true ending, you need to know the plot of the game, which is this. The Rainbow Islands, which is where Kirby lives in this game, are connected to Dreamland, and the rainbows that connect all the islands have been stolen by evil dark matter, who takes control of King Dedede. There's 7 islands total, which means 7 levels, with each level having 4 to 8 stages, which is much more than the original in Dreamland. But to move on to each stage, all you need to do is defeat the boss at the end of the stage. But hidden on each island in a random stage is a rainbow drop. And if you collect all 7 rainbow drops throughout the game, you fight the true final boss, Dark Matter, after defeating King Dedede. Now, it doesn't sound that hard, and I personally tried to collect them all, but I just could not get the 4th one. Some drops required you to have certain abilities that you had to go back to previous stages to get, or certain animal friends that were not guaranteed to spawn. So the true ending did require a little backtracking and the ability to not get hit, which I was not the biggest fan of for this game because I stunk. Now, besides that, Dreamland 2 also lacked a bit in extra game content besides the main story compared to Kirby's Adventure, which I didn't mind. It was a Game Boy game, I didn't expect much. We already got so many more levels compared to Dreamland. The game has the usual goal game, which I don't consider extra content, more like a fun little end stage treat. So the only sub-game-esque feeling in this game was after defeating the boss that wasn't Dedede, you could re-enter the boss room and play a star catching minigame to catch all the stars thrown at you, while harmful objects are also thrown at you. If you get hit by an object, the level closes immediately, and this is required to get 100%, and the reward for 100% has 3 more options unlocked in the main menu, which are the music room, boss endurance, and some mode where you go through the bosses again and collect all the stars. I couldn't really tell you. I didn't really enjoy this game as much. I beat it and I played through it, but I didn't really enjoy it that much. Overall, I felt a little more disappointed in Dreamland 2. I wasn't the biggest fan of the animal companions, but I think it's more I was annoyed at the true ending being such a hassle. I had to look up where most of the rainbow drops were and didn't bother with how complicated some of them were. But if you don't really care for true endings in games and you don't like to bitch like I do, then the game's still a fantastic Kirby game. You get everything you need out of it with the platforming. It took me significantly longer to beat this game than the original Dreamland also, because it took me about 3 hours. Now, I know I was just dissing on Dreamland 2. I will give it credit. It was very successful, and it continued the Dreamland series. And the next main series Kirby game wasn't too far away after the success of it. Japan had to wait exactly 1 year, North America about 16 months, and the PAL region about 17 months for a fan favorite Kirby Superstar on the SNES, later remade into Superstar Ultra on the DS. Let me tell you, this game is insane and filled with content. Before we get into Kirby Superstar, Kirby had one more game released late in 1995, and that's Kirby's Block Ball, which was a Breakout clone. You know, Breakout, the game where you destroy bricks with a ball. Yeah, it's that, but with Kirby. Now, I know it sounds like I'm kind of trashing the game, but I'll give it credit where it's due. The game offers a good amount of content with 11 main stages, a few sub-games, and even has a small amount of copy abilities. And just like every other Kirby game, it's got fantastic music. That's something I never need to talk about. I love Kirby music so much. But Kirby's Block Ball only sold about 320,000 copies. But I feel it was probably delayed, as one point in development, HAL, the main development company for Kirby, they decided that it didn't feel like a Kirby game and then had the team spend 6 months revising the game with strict instructions on how Kirby should move. So it's good to see this spin-off game wasn't just them trying to get a cash grab as they developed the next main series installment. And I will say, I played this game also a little bit, and it was actually so much fun I couldn't stop playing for about an hour. Yeah, wasn't that long. But now that brings us back to Kirby Superstar and the SNES. This behemoth of a game brought 6 main games and 2 side ones. The game advertises 8 games in one on the cover, so we're going to go through all of them quickly and then talk about some fun additions Superstar brought as a whole. The first game I played was Spring Breeze, which was just a small remake of Kirby's Dream Land with updated graphics. You go through 4 levels and collect sparkling stars and save all of Dreamland's food. Just like the original Dreamland, this game is rather quick, but still a good time. Next, we checked out Gourmet Race, which was another short game. All you did in this one was race King Dedede through 3 levels and try to eat more food than him. Game number 3 we tried out introduces a new character in the game, which is a giant bird named Dynablade, and the plot of this small game is that she is ruining everyone's crops, and Kirby must travel to the mountain where she lives to defeat her. It's only 5 levels total, but once Dynablade's defeated, you learn that she was just trying to feed her babies. And Kirby, being the good Samaritan they are, feeds the babies and teaches them how to fly. And don't worry, Dynablade lives. She even has an episode in the anime dedicated to her. Next, I tried one of the smaller games with Samurai Kirby, and this one is very similar to the Quick Draw sub-game in Kirby's Adventure. You take on 5 opponents and press A when the game tells you. I played another smaller game next, which was Megatron Punch. All you do is face 3 opponents in a contest to see who can make a bigger crack in Planet Popstar. And fan favorite Bandana Waddle Dee is one of the opponents. One thing for sure you notice in this small minigame is a cameo of Mario, Luigi, and Toad and Birdo in the background. A fun little addition to this Kirby game. Some cameos. The next game is a bigger one that we checked out, which is the Great Cave Offensive, where you go through a giant cave collecting as much treasure as possible. There's 60 items total you can get, but you can leave anytime if you can even find the exit. The fun thing about this game is that some of the items you collect are references to other Nintendo titles like the Earthbound series or Legend of Zelda, just to name a couple of them. Now we only got 2 more games left to cover, and these 2 are definitely the biggest, I'd say. The first one we do is Revenge of Meta Knight. The story is a simple one for this game, I'd say. Meta Knight's just trying to take over Dreamland with his battleship halberd. The game has 7 small chapters you play through, and this is probably the second best game on Kirby Superstar. A couple of fun things about this game is that 1, this is the first time we see Meta Knight take on a fully evil role without being controlled, and 2, this is the second time in the franchise there's a strict time limit on beating a level, and it's the first time that this strict time limit has an actual clock to tell us how much time we have. And then our final game, we go to the Milky Way Wishes, with the main plot in this one being the sun and moon are fighting, and Kirby needs to wake up a character named Nova and make a wish. We go through the galaxy to collect 7 stars, and once we collect all the stars, a little jester named Marks, who we met in the intro, steals our wish because it turns out they're evil. How could something so cute be so evil? Well, after beating Nova, we fight Marks, and once Marks is beaten, the sun and moon become friends again. Here's the unique thing about Milky Way Wishes. It's the way the copy ability works. There's an item called Copy Essence Deluxe in this game, and if Kirby touches it, they gain access to the ability permanently, whenever they want. And there are 19 abilities to gain in the Milky Way Wishes. And that's basically the fan favorite Kirby Superstar. They did add some fun new abilities throughout the 9 games with 25 abilities total, and 13 of them being new. Now the biggest change I saw in this game was the addition of the Helper. If you had an ability and pressed the A button, the ability you had would turn back into the enemy and become your ally. It was intended to add co-op to the game, but if you were like me and didn't have friends, the CPU would control the ally. And my God, did they do a lot of damage. Seriously, I didn't even touch Dedede here and he got clobbered. But even bigger than the co-op, this game added something huge. They gave Kirby cute hats. Sure, some of them were recolors due to limitations like Wheel and Yo-Yo both having backwards caps and Beam and Mirror both having jester hats, but who cares? Kirby's looking so cute with these on and I love it. Now, if this game being a fan favorite, you expect it to sell well, and for Kirby's first main series release on the SNES, it didn't disappoint with an impressive 1.44 million sales, and add the almost 3 million remake sales, it's safe to see why this is one of the most well-known Kirby games. I had a lot of fun reliving a little bit of my childhood. Despite it being the original and not the DS, sure, I beat all the games in about 4 hours, but the replayability on almost all these games are extremely high and will always have a special place in my heart. Plus, the remake even has a few more extra games. But if you look at Superstar's release date on the SNES, it was only 9 days before the Nintendo 64 released in North America. So you would assume that the next main series Kirby game could be an N64 release. And 1 year later, on November 27th, 1997, HAL delivered Kirby's Dream Land 3, first releasing in North America, and then 4 months later in Japan, and then 10 years later on the Virtual Console for Europe. But here's the catch. It was on the SNES. At this point, the Nintendo 64's been out for a year and had some big titles on the system already, like Star Fox 64, Super Mario 64, and a few others. But there was no Kirby game yet. I assume the development of the game took longer than they thought, or HAL was just not ready to make the jump to 3D with the N64. As you would expect, Kirby's Dream Land 3 did not perform well sales-wise. A game released so late into a console's lifespan, especially when the next-gen console's already been out for over a year, does not equal a recipe for success. Dreamland 3 is by far the worst selling main series game with only 360,000 sales. Bad sales does not equal a bad game, and Dreamland 3 does have some charm to it. Personally, for me, it was one of my least favorite games to play of the main series, but it has its positives and negatives. Plus, I enjoy a lot of Kirby games, so it's not a bad thing if this is towards the bottom of my list. Firstly, we'll get the usual positives out of the way. Good music and good graphics, like all Kirby games. I feel like Kirby Dream Land 3 does a really good job at utilizing the SNES hardware, and it produces a beautifully made game. Sure, it was the last first-party game released on the system in North America, marking the end of an era, but still was an absolutely beautiful game. The co-op option is also brought back in the game, with GUI making their second appearance and their first major role, and of course Nintendo's making me realize I don't have any friends because the AI is controlling GUI on my end. Along with GUI, the animal friends from Dreamland 2 make a reappearance along with 3 new animal friends. We got Nago the cat, Pitch the bird, and Choo Choo the octopus. But all the friends help Kirby in some way, and like the previous games, the friends enhance whatever ability Kirby has. Speaking of abilities, there's only 9 total in this game, with Cleaning and Love Stick being the new ones. And the Love Stick is only accessible if you fight the true final boss and get the true ending. Yep, that's back in this game. Just remember, this is my opinion on the game. We all have different opinions. I'm not a fan of true final endings like this. I think they're fun to do, but when I'm streaming a video game, yep, I stream this, shameless plug, I'm trying to beat it kind of fast and not spend 12 hours playing Kirby's Dream Land 3. Now, the way the true ending works in this game is that every level you have a chance to collect a heart star for doing something for a certain person. For example, some levels have you not jump on any flowers throughout the entire level. Oh yeah, and Samus makes another cameo in this with these heart stars, which I thought was pretty cool. And there's only 5 worlds total in this game, and each world has 6 stages plus a boss. In my playthrough, I went through the whole 5 worlds in about 4 hours total and did not get the good ending, of course. But this game does something a little different. Dark matter possessing Dedede, that's happened before, and poor King Dedede just gets absolutely screwed. But this final boss is actually kind of a creepy battle, as it's just a giant eyeball named Zero. In the final battle, it's actually bloody. One of the few times in the Kirby franchise that there's blood shed. And despite this final battle being bloody, it didn't affect the game's ERCB rating, as it was rated K through A, which is basically rated E, but it did get changed to E10 Plus on Kirby's Dream Collection. And that's basically the main story, really. Outside of that, I wasn't too impressed. You had your usual boss rush where you fight all the bosses and see how well you do, along with a new goal game. But like I said before, the goal game, I don't view it as a sub-game or bonus content. They did introduce a heart star related sub-game once you beat the main game and the levels are changed around a little bit, but it was just another sub-game. That's Dreamland 3 for you. It was your usual Kirby platforming game with a new way to access a hidden boss, set worlds you travel in, and a small number of copy abilities. I personally found the game a little bit slower compared to others, and the lack of copy abilities was also a little bit disappointing for me, along with the not-so-fun sub-games outside the main story. But I will say, the main story is still good, and the graphics are some of my favorite graphics in any video game. And overall, if you have a chance to play Kirby Dream Land 3, I would highly suggest it. I know I trashed on it a little bit, but it was another fantastic Kirby game, as it was the end of an era for Nintendo, as it was the last first-party game released on the SNES. I felt it left a lot to be desired. It was a good Kirby game overall, but I felt like the HAL team was ready for the next big challenge with the change to 3D on the N64, and maybe that resulted in a less satisfying experience with Dreamland 3. They also removed the hats. What the fuck? Now, Kirby remained out of the spotlight for a few years as the change to 3D took time to learn for these developers, as they'd been using the same type of formula for the series since Dreamland, which was 8 years ago. But funny enough, the next main series game, Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards, actually started development just before Dreamland 3 released in 1997. Project manager Takashi Saito, sorry if I said that wrong, even said keeping the project on schedule was challenging due to HAL's close attention to detail. According to Saito, the development team also had to be careful transitioning the series art style to 3D, as they did not want to disappoint fans of the series. While the game is a first in the series with 3D graphics, it still has a linear path like a usual Kirby platformer, so a lot of people, including myself, call this a 2.5D game. It initially was developed for the 64 DD, which if you don't know, the DD is a magnetic disk drive that was an add-on peripheral for the Nintendo 64. It was basically making the N64 even stronger, and getting its own games developed for this add-on. It was initially announced in 1995, but had numerous delays, and it did eventually release in late 1999, but only in Japan, and it was a failure, with only about 15,000 units sold. All the games that were developed for this add-on were either released on Nintendo 64, GameCube, or just straight up cancelled. But lucky for us, Kirby 64 got its standard N64 release on June 26th in the year 2000. Now, Kirby 64 is considered the 4th and final installment in the Dreamland saga. Like the 2 previous Dreamland games before it, Kirby 64 has a good and a bad ending, with the final boss being another form of dark matter named Zero 2. Very creative. Like the previous games as well, to get to this final boss, you must do 100% of something in the main story. Dreamland 2 had rainbow drops, Dreamland 3 had the heart stars, and for Kirby 64, you must collect all 74 crystal shards. The crystal shards are spread out between 6 worlds, with each world housing 3 main levels and a boss level. Each main level has 3 shards, while the boss has 1. The shards are all hidden pretty well, and some require the use of abilities to get, or a combination of abilities. And that's where this game gets its most unique feature, probably the most unique feature in any Kirby game. The power to combine 2 abilities into 1. With that being part of the game, it only has 7 base abilities, but with those 7, you can end up with 36 unique combinations. Now, I personally did try to use all the combinations, and I'm sure I missed 1 or 2, but my favorite one was Spark plus Cutter, giving you a giant lightsaber-looking sword. Even when you're not swinging it, the sword has a hitbox, which is huge. Now, let's quickly talk about the main story. The game starts on the planet of Ripple Star, where a group of fairies live and they're protected by the power of the giant crystal shard. And of course, that power attracts dark matter. When dark matter attacks, the main fairy that we get to know named Ribbon tries to fly away with the shard, but gets hit and has the shard break into 74 pieces. Now, as I said, this game has a good and a bad ending, and when I played through, I decided to 100% it, because come on. I got 100% a couple of these games, and it only took me 6 hours and 40 minutes to do. Like all the other good endings, you get a unique power-up for the final fight, and this final fight reminded me a lot of Star Fox 64 with how it was set up. Now the boss, Zero 2, looks like an upgraded version of Zero from Dreamland 2. Zero 2 shoots exploding energy balls from their eye while you're dodging and you fire crystal shards at them. The hitboxes on this fight were really annoying and seemed quite large, but it wasn't a bad fight. I'll always applaud the Kirby development team for thinking outside the box with these final bosses. Doesn't seem like they're afraid to really change it up. That's basically Kirby 64, the first time we get to see Kirby in 3D. And for the first time in 3D, it didn't disappoint with a solid 1.77 million sales, and I'm sure a lot of nostalgic memories for many people. And at this point in Kirby's life, we've had 6 main story games and 5 spin-off titles. We still have 6 more main series games to discuss and a good amount of spin-offs, but to end this, I'm going to give you a quick fun fact on every game we talked about in this video. Ready? If you pause Kirby's Dream Land for 20 seconds, Kirby will begin dancing and then go back to their original pose. Kirby's Pinball Land is one of the 2 Kirby games you cannot view the staff credits. Kirby's Adventure has the largest memory of any officially manufactured NES cartridge with a size of 6 megabits, which equals about 768 kilobytes. Kirby's Dream Course contains sound effects from the Earthbound series since both games were developed by HAL around the same time. Kirby's Dream Land 2 is one of the only main series games to save your life count, meaning if you quit with 5 lives, you'll have 5 lives when you return. Star Allies is another game that does this. Kirby's Block Ball only has 4 copy abilities, the fewest of any Kirby game. Not counting Dreamland, of course. Kirby's Avalanche is one of the only Kirby games never referenced anywhere, and I bought it off eBay. In Japan, Kirby Superstar was sold in the box of Paulownia wood, which is culturally significant in Japan, being used to store valuable objects. I also view Kirby as very valuable. Kirby Star Stacker is one of the only Kirby games in the series to not have any female characters. The other was Kirby's Toy Box. And on that note, Kirby's Toy Box was a set of sub-games developed for the Super Nintendo's Satellaview satellite network. It had 8 small games on it. Kirby's Dream Land 3 is the last game to depict Kirby to have whiskers. All later installments give Kirby those cute cheek blushes that we all know. And Kirby 64 is the first game where you fight King Dedede before Wispy Woods. Did you like those facts? Well, that's it for part 1 in the history and evolution of the Kirby franchise. Hope you liked it, and I'll see you next time.